Okay, good afternoon and good morning to everyone joining us. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on engaging traditionally underserved communities using virtual public involvement. I'm Kevin McCoy from the U.S. Department of Transportation's Volpe Center, kicking us off here today. And just a few housekeeping items before we get going. We want to make sure that everyone knows that you do have the option to turn on live captioning for this event. You can do that by selecting the three dots menu, more options menu, and then turning on live captions. We also want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded and that the Federal Highway Administration intends to post the recording of this webinar on the Virtual Public Involvement website. There will be a question and answer session following the presentation today, and you can enter questions into the Q&A pod at any time. We will, however, be saving the questions until after the presentation. We will be using a live polling software during this webinar just to get a sense for who's joining us today and what your level of experience is with virtual public involvement. And there's two ways that you can connect to that. You can either type in the URL www.pollev.com/FHWA VPI 550 into a web browser, and there should be a link to that in the announcements. Or you can use your camera app on your phone, point that at the QR code on your screen, and that should prompt you to link to that website. So if you guys can go ahead and start filling out that poll now, we'll take a quick look at some of those responses and just see who's joining us today. So what type of agency do you work for? We should start getting some responses here in a moment. Let me make sure that I've got the poll activated here. And when we'll start getting some responses, we'll see kind of the composition of folks that we have. And then there's two more questions. One is about your level of experience using VPI and engaging traditionally underserved communities. And that, of course, is the topic for today's event. And there's another one that's more about kind of your role within your organization. So as we can see here so far, most of our respondents are with state departments of transportation or metropolitan planning organizations. We have some consultants, some folks from the USDOT or Federal Highway Administration. And those results will keep coming in, but we'll continue on here. What's your level of experience in using VPI techniques? We have some very high, but most of us are somewhere in that mid-range, medium or high. And that's great. And then also, well, I think the third poll isn't coming up, so we'll just go ahead and go back to our presentation slides and move on with the next part of the webinar. Appreciate everybody taking that poll. We'll come back to that at the very end just for a quick evaluation. But with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today's event, Carolyn Nelson with the Federal Highway Administration Office of Project Development and Environmental Review.
All right, thank you, Kevin. If you could just definitely let me know when everything is up and running, and if you can all see it, that'd be great.
Looks good, Carolyn. All set to go.
All right, perfect. Okay, so hello, everyone, and thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. My name is, again, Carolyn Nelson, and I definitely want to thank everyone for joining us today to talk about reaching traditionally underserved communities using public involvement techniques and, in particular, virtual public involvement strategies. But before we begin, I do want to mention that although we do understand that there have been several recent executive orders from the Biden-Harris administration, we are not currently in a position to discuss any pending legislation that would address those issues at this point. However, we will be discussing Federal Highway's work on equity, environmental justice, and working with underserved communities, and you will get an understanding based off of our experience and successful implementation that we've had over the years. So the presentation today will rather focus on FHWA's extremely long history of working on equity issues and also our Everyday Counts initiative that is focused specifically on promoting the use of digital tools as we balance that public involvement approach with VPI. So let's dive right into it. So to get us started, I'm going to first talk about the importance of public involvement overall. Now, public involvement is a really critical component within the transportation decision-making process in general, because it allows for meaningful consideration and input from interested individuals into the decision-making process. But there is a difference when you're looking at things from an in-person perspective and a VPI perspective. So the first thing you need to do is develop an outreach plan, and you need to understand what method or platform you will be using when you develop that outreach plan. So to do that, you need to get your target audience. The best way to achieve this goal of that target audience is to develop a community profile. You will hear me talk about that a lot during the presentation. A community profile should basically contain your neighborhood boundaries, of course, your population and demographic characteristics, your economic characteristics, your transportation and travel characteristics. How does the community move around? How do they operate? Do they walk? Do they drive? Do they bike? Are there sidewalks within the community? Are there children in the community with sidewalks and crosswalks within the community? You need to have an understanding of that when you're developing your plan. If everybody commute, that'd be great. And then also understand physical characteristics as well as cultural resources within the community. And then understand the community context and history. Have we been there before? Have we split this community in half? Have we torn it apart with the road? Are we coming through with something new? Or have we clipped off part of the community? All of those things are very important to understand in developing your community profile. Now, as we develop that EJ or underserved community profile, you need to understand that when you identify the populations, that really helps you determine what type of outreach what your outreach should look like. So your profile should include the current situations as well as future characteristics or future issues that may happen down the road. So we understand, from a federal perspective, that despite the importance of public involvement, though, to develop that meaningful and effective plan for your projects and securing that broad-based public involvement across a diverse landscape of participants can be a very significant challenge, but we are here to help you, most definitely. So the issue is that people are increasingly relying on social media, mobile applications, and various other virtual technology for their news, information, and public discussion. Even my husband reads the newspaper every day that shows up on his mobile phone. So as you develop your plan, it is really important to understand the public's expectations of how you will communicate with them. Things are changing, and the way the information and opportunities is changing. The expectation of the public is that public agencies will change along with them and provide the information in a way that's needed for them. Now, what you need to do is collect data and information from your public data sets. Is how you pull this together. You need to do field work. Developing a community profile is almost impossible to do sitting at a desk. You need to go out into the community to see how it operates, see how they move around, how they communicate. That is one of the best ways to do it. And you want to present that information in terms of a narrative text, maps, graphics, tables. We don't specify how you do it. You need to just make sure you have it and it is presented in your document. Now, getting into the actual public involvement. So, as I said before, public involvement is just one of the most important aspects to stakeholder participation in underserved and EJ populations. But it must be done proactively to ensure meaningful opportunities for EJ and underserved communities to engage. Well, while that's a beautiful sentence, what does it actually mean? We're going to talk about that. So, when you're obtaining that community input, it really does make for a better decision-making process, and it really promotes better working relationships because the community understands that you understand them as a community. But there are two really important aspects to meaningful public engagement. The first one is your public outreach, and that is, what are we doing as an agency to disseminate relevant information to residents and stakeholders in underserved or EJ populations, not just to tell them that, yes, we're having a meeting. Well, that's great. That's not relevant to them. How are we disseminating, and what types of information are you disseminating? What does your public outreach looks like? Number two is your public participation. How is the community receiving the input that you're putting out, and how are they responding to the information that you're putting out. To put information in a major grocery store that's several miles away from your underserved community is not very helpful. So basically, in theory, if your public outreach is sufficient, then meaningful public participation will occur. So what does that look like? Good public outreach will most likely occur with potential underserved and EJ communities when you have, again, adequately identified them within the general project area. Specific ways to do that is to notify the community early. Notify them, let them know that you are out there. This is by word of mouth, print ads, radio, contacting your churches or lodges, flyers, it doesn't matter. I will say, if you have an environmental assessment project, an EIS, publishing something in the Federal Register is not the way to say, well, I've done adequate outreach in EJ community. They don't read the Federal Register. That is not adequate. You want to make it where they is sufficient notification for your underserved communities. They're not going to go to the Federal Register and read it. I don't read it only because I have to, is why I look at it. So you want to make sure that you do sufficient outreach. Then you also want to solicit input. Think of ways to get input from the affected people within the population, those seniors, those limited English proficient populations, those small businesses, even public transit riders. And part of you developing that is looking at the community demographics. You definitely want to look at overcoming communication barriers. Reach out to those that may have lower reading skills. Again, when you're pulling together, those demographics should be able to tell you that. Are those who primarily who speak other languages as their primary language. Logistical considerations are really influenced by the community demographics. So public meetings may require you to look at written, pictorial, and oral versions of the material that needs to be presented. And also choose meeting locations and facilities that are local and convenient and accessible to a diverse population. When you typically have a project and it's, I don't know, 6 or 7 miles, you have a meeting on the north end and the south end, we call it good. That is not sufficient for your EJ population. You have to be a little bit more targeted, more specific to where they are. And then I would want to say, look at including your traditional, non-traditional leadership. So for example, if you have Native American populations, you might want to consider talking to tribal leaders or tribal elders. You won't get very far. If you have African American populations, maybe you want to talk to your religious groups, your social groups, any grassroots organization within the community, because there's a trust level that is missing for government outreach. And then lastly, please be sensitive to the community's concerns regarding possible outside influences, such as an employer retaliating or retaliation or job loss from public opposition to the project. If you think you're going to lose your job, you are not going to say, I have any opposition to this project. You will go to a third party that will help you identify those issues, and that's problematic. So the next thing we want to do is look at this from the terms of equity. So why do we do all of this stuff? Well, we do this to achieve an equitable transportation system, to achieve equity in transportation. Now, as we talk about this, when we say equity in transportation at Federal Highway, we are looking to get a fairness in the mobility and accessibility of all members of the community to meet the needs of the community. That is what we're looking at. So when you're talking about an equitable transportation system, this may include other individuals outside of your EJ, your traditional EJ population. So of course, as you see on the screen, it will include minority and low income. That is EJ, but it will also and should include elderly, children, those with limited English proficiency, persons with disability. All of this is information that can be found or can be collected as you do your community profile. And I want you to remember that one thing is very important to note, that equity does not mean equal. An equitable transportation plan considers the circumstances that are impacting the community's mobility and connectivity needs. And you use this information to determine the measures that are needed to develop an equitable transportation network to fit the needs of the community. So I have a slide that helps address that for traditionally underserved communities, but I look at it as when you are looking at traditionally underserved communities, address them in terms of equitable, not equally. So if you have seen me present before, many of you may have seen this slide before, either from me or from others, but people use this slide for many things. I like to use it in terms of what has been historically done in terms of a traditionally underserved community. Now, if the goal here is to watch the baseball game, on your left-hand side of the screen, you will see an equal situation. That's equality. And the people in the shirts, colors represents a certain portion or population of underserved populations. Fell in the blue shirt, fell in the red shirt, fell in the purple shirt. If the goal is to watch the game, we give them all the same thing, all one crate. The fella in the purple shirt is not enjoying that game for sure. On the right-hand side of the screen is what you see as an equitable situation. The fellow in the blue shirt, or that portion of the population, has absolutely nothing because they don't need it to get to the goal of watching the game or to address your purpose and need, however you want to look at it. The fellow in the red shirt still needs the one crate. However, the fellow in the purple shirt needs 2 crates because that's what he needs to enjoy the game, to enjoy the effort of what you're doing. Now, some have said, and you might have heard, well, another thing to do is just remove the fence. You could remove the fence, and that could also leave the fella in the purple shirt standing in mud. The point isn't what you can remove or address so that everyone can see the same thing. The point is, when you go to these communities, you may have to do things that are equitable, but they will not, and oftentimes may not be equal. So you want to make it equitable so that everyone can enjoy the facility, because when you go to a community, certain things are already in place. They're starting out in an unequitable situation that's not equal. So you want to try and balance that to make it all equal. So it's not a simple thing of just removing something. It may be something where you have to balance out that equality to make sure that it is equitable. Hopefully that people understand that. So when you are looking at underserved communities, when you look at the screen, I cannot see anything in the chat, but feel free to type it in the chat. What group do you see is missing? If I said that this was an underserved group on the screen, 1, would you believe me? And 2, who would be missing? So since I can't see the chat, but feel free to pop it in there. I can see it later. Of course, people of color would be missing from this group. However, this could be considered underserved populations in terms of outreach from a virtual perspective, because these are groups that we typically, that we may typically or traditionally miss. For example, you have your young professionals as this group. They're too busy to go to a meeting. The last thing I have to do is time to go and sit in a traditional meeting to hear about a project, even if it's on my street. I don't really care. You have those early and mid-year professionals where I'm just too busy to go to a meeting. You know, you have your stay-at-home moms, you have your college students in this picture, which is either I'm partying or I'm trying to get out of school, and or both, to go to a meeting. Not on my radar, as well as the elderly. Now, when you look at reaching to these people virtually, most of this group you will probably bring into that circle. But virtual public involvement should expand beyond what they would say underserved communities. You want to look at traditionally underserved communities, which would include the element of those that have been looked over, ignored, not heard over time. So when you do your public involvement, it should bring people together, irregardless of race, color, LEP, limited English proficiency. It doesn't matter. When you do your virtual outreach, you want it to look and be very, very inclusive. Because I do want to say that equity should bring people together. Public involvement for your EJ and or your underserved communities should look and must look as different as the community does itself. They should have the meaningful opportunities to participate. So again, make sure that your plan looks at innovative ways to solicit information from them. And as we talked about before, those that may be disabled, bus riders, seniors, young, older, limited English proficiency, all of those people should be part of your outreach and making sure that they are being identified early in the process. So some of the things that we want to talk about today is, of course, the Everyday Counts initiative under EDC 6, virtual public involvement. We started virtual public involvement in EDC 5, and we carried it over into EDC 6. We're still looking at many of the same tools. However, our focus in EDC 6 has changed a little bit. So under EDC 5, we brought you 8 tools, which I'll go over in the sense of introducing them to the general public. Now in EDC 6, we've done a couple of different things. We want to broaden the reach for virtual outreach. We want to provide VPI assistance to smaller transportation agencies, Mpos, to help them with the resources that they may need to reach out to the public throughout the entire transportation decision-making process. We also want to look at institutionalization, which means we're working with state agencies and others to basically integrate VPI into your everyday, regular, ongoing practice. So you've adopted it as part of your PIP, your PPP, your public engagement plan, your LRTP, your long-range transportation plan, and in any other document. It's just a standard way of how you do business. And then we look at it from engaging traditionally underserved populations, which we'll focus a little bit on. And here, when we talk about that, we're looking at making sure that there is equitable access, what I talked about before, which includes minority and low income, that's your EJ population, but it also includes looking at the elderly, the disabled, different types of populations as you're looking at an equitable access to a community. You also want to increase the opportunities for engagement. To do that, you need to make sure that your outreach focuses on those traditionally underserved populations, because what we don't want is to go into the VPI realm and we are still living out the traditionally underserved. We may get a certain portion of the underserved, as I talked about earlier, the young and the elderly, and the college age and the professionals, but we are still leaving out that pocket of the community that we would consider traditionally underserved. And then we also want to look at combining traditional and virtual methods. Now, community history is very important there because there is a strong absence of trust because of how the communities are, just being honest. Historically, many underserved populations have a community history with transportation departments that has led to a complete lack of trust in the government. So many of their concerns have been just ignored in the decision-making process. So as we move into the VPI realm, we need to make sure that we address that. And because of what's been done in the past, it has fostered a very strong sense of suspicion and distrust of the government. So we want to make sure that we are taking all of this into account as we are developing our plans for virtual outreach. Now, as we talked about in EDC 5 and we continue to talk about in EDC 6, we have just the entire landscape of virtual public involvement is very, very broad and diverse. So we organized it into 8 categories without actually leaning one to the other. But there are several things within those categories that we really say are important to EJ and underserved populations. Now, of the 8 categories that are on the screen, the ones that are ostracized are the ones that I will be talking about today. That is mobile applications, project visualizations, and virtual town halls. Those are 3 of the topmost things to do or to utilize as you're doing your outreach for traditionally underserved communities, and I'll give you examples. So our first category is mobile applications. One of the most effective and efficient methods of virtual outreach to an underserved population are mobile apps. Most of us in general have just become very comfortable and familiar with just the power of a mobile app and a smartphone because it's just commonplace in our lives now. And I know, and I've said before, even my young adults that are in their early 20s, they don't move without that phone, which means when I call or text them and they don't answer, I know that they see it, so they know they better answer me because it's either in their hand or it's in their back pocket. So if it's off, it's ringing, it's jiggling, but you know it's me. When mom pops up, you better answer it because they always have it. They don't move without it. And that is a that is a huge portion of the population that we are actually seeing being involved now more so in virtual public outreach. But it is just an awesome thing to have because it can just be used in a variety of ways to enhance your public involvement plans and to share information with the public. Now, what you see here on the screen is an example from the Delaware DOT where they've developed a mobile app just for a range of activities from sharing information about a project, alerting stakeholders to upcoming public meetings. Now, this particular app also shares alerts, I'm sorry, from the state DOT about construction projects, transit services, locations of electric vehicle charging stations, and just various information, including links about upcoming public meetings and public workshops. So mobile apps are just wonderful. There are some huge benefits to using mobile applications. It basically optimizes the websites or any app that you're using because we have found through our research that low-income populations often only have internet on their phones. So, and they will have a cell phone, low income populations, but their internet is usually on that phone. So apps can make it easy for participants to participate or share or understand information that we are putting out. It makes them easier to submit photos of things that they like or dislike, and it helps keep them engaged and aware of projects that we are doing. Typically, the public will lose interest when projects lag. So mobile app locations, you can geotag comments, making it easier even for the transportation staff to associate comments with the physical space, whether it's at the state level, the regional level, or the city level. You definitely will reach more people when you use any type of mobile app. As I said, even with my husband, how many people you really think about get a paper thrown in their front yard nowadays? Most people don't even remember the days when you used to have a newspaper thrown in the front yard. My husband still reads it every day, but he gets it on his phone. That's just something that's just hugely popular. It's just what we do now. Here's an example of a physical kiosk that could be used in like a public space. This was pre-COVID, of course, but hopefully we're getting back there for like surveys. You can use that for people that need to get in touch with you or to stay in touch with what's going on. This is from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. You can provide free Wi-Fi hotspots, coordinate with libraries, especially now as they're opening up to expand access to internet. We talked about social media and geo-targeting, again, to reach those specific populations that may be harder to reach. And that's another thing that they talked about with using the kiosk. So there's just a lot of ways that you can use and respond with your mobile applications. And lastly, I would say these are very popular online platforms, definitely enhances EJ participation because they can get information from wherever they are, and they can engage in the process from wherever they are and whenever they want. And another thing that it does, oftentimes members of the underserved populations are very hesitant to attend the traditional in-person meetings because of fear of being overlooked or neglected or criticized or talked down to. So this allows them to interact with transportation professionals in a way that that is comfortable for them, but you still have their involvement in hearing what their concerns would be. Now, the next tool I recommend is project visualizations. And again, a wonderful tool when you're talking about outreach, particularly in this virtual world. Project visualizations can complement also any in-person meeting, because as we talk about virtual outreach, we do not want to get away from the fact that in-person meetings are still wonderful and one of the best ways to talk to people, because people like that interaction. But if you are talking to them virtually, project visualizations really help engage the public. They're visualizations and they're particularly useful, I would say, but not only more so, but in project development projects, and particularly when you're talking about design. And that's because visualizations can provide any stakeholder with a greater sense of what the proposed project will accomplish, and it makes it seem more real, more realistic to them. Visualizations can explain a project to anyone, regardless of their background or prior knowledge or understanding of what you're talking about. So let me give you a very brief example. So kind of walk through this slide with me very quickly. So the first slide at the top is how a customer would explain what they wanted. That next picture there is how the project leader understood it to be. It's a little different. That third picture there is how us as engineers designed it, because honestly, we are just geniuses. So we know what you want and we can do it for you. That's a very interesting one. The next picture there is how the programmer wrote it. The last picture at the top shows how the sales executive described it with the chair swinging. The next picture on the bottom is how the program project was documented. Absolutely nothing. I'm sure we've all seen this at some point. The next picture is what the operations installed. I love this picture here is what the customer was billed for. Not a tree in sight, but absolutely an amusement park. How the help desk supported it, just cut the thing down. But what the customer really wanted was just a string and a tire. So that's how we want to use visualization to talk about what we're doing. So as we're looking at visualization, this is an image from the WisDOT Visual Engineering Resource Group, and they develop visualizations to support the department's project development processes, and helping to visualize and get a better sense of the proposed project and what it proposes to complement. It definitely helps reduce project delays because the public can basically get a clearer understanding of how they will be affected in the project, and that's really what we all want to do. Now, this is an example from FHWA's own federal lands, and this shows a 3D visualization of a proposed project. Now, this is particularly important when you're working on design projects where aesthetics are highly valued by stakeholders, like in the National Park Service, because beautification and aesthetics are very important. So the last thing I want to move on to is virtual town halls. Again, another great tool for outreach to EJ and underserved communities is a virtual town hall or an online meeting. Now, this approach, again, allows people to participate remotely, and it removes that common barrier that underserved communities have for engagement. You don't need to be present in the space to learn about the project, and it can be flexible. It allows for low-tech options also for engagement into your meetings. You can have call-in options or telephone town halls, which do not require internet service. You could actually use it from a landline. This is an example from the Alamo area NPO where they use public meetings to help reduce barriers to engagement in their planning process. So these are interactive aspects for which includes mapping tools, so people can basically explore and interact at their own pace. And in addition to that, they record the meeting. So if you miss it, you can also get it in person. And again, you can see where this is great for LEP populations, where if you have to put something in a different language, everyone will be able to participate. Here's another example from the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, where they use virtual town halls to discuss their fiscal year 2019 and 2020 budget. And they told us that their participation increased exponentially by using an online meeting, and they were better. Their response to getting input from the public was better than they ever had for any of their meetings. This is another example from the Florida DOT district, where they transitioned into using in-person public hearings, not NEPA-required public hearings, but public hearings when considering making highway access changes. So based on the Florida law, it requires a public hearing, a non-NEPA-required public hearing for all access changes. Now, I will very, very briefly discuss virtual public hearings in terms of virtual outreach. And this is how we use VPI to address public hearings to engage underserved populations. Now, our Office of Project Development and Environmental Review did develop temporary guidance for VPI's use for the traditional public hearing for federal highway. And you should have that link in the chat to get to that guidance, and it includes 7 questions and answers on what needs to happen. For basically, our guides and our NEPA decisions are based on 23 USC 128 for public hearings, which mandates that the public be afforded the opportunity to review information and provide comments at a public hearing. Typically, this is for an EIS project, but it can also be for other projects where you feel the need to have a public hearing. It is also to be found in the 23 CFR 771-111, as you see on the screen, that talks about your early coordination and public involvement. We're going to basically, using VPI is helping to engage those individuals so that your outreach, even for your public hearings now, can be done a little bit more effectively. So VPI techniques are now being used for a temporary replacement of the in-person public hearings that are required in NEPA. So VPI strategies to provide additional outreach for the traditionally underserved populations in NEPA-required public hearings is what I'll just be focused on. And again, it includes a range of options from your virtual town halls, webinars, video conferencing tools, Facebook Live, any types of social media. We don't actually recommend any one tool. We will have future webinars to talk about things that work and don't work in terms of virtual public outreach. We just say that you can use a variety of tools to do that. Now, the question that I will be talking about is question number 4. Again, if you look at the guidance, there are 7 Q&As. The one I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about is that question number 4. And that is, are there any issues for special consideration when using VPI as described in this particular guidance? The answer is yes. Provide full, fair, and meaningful opportunities for participation, and basically including participation for minority and low-income populations, non-English speaking, persons with disabilities, telephone, and similar options. Now, to do that, because typically what we don't want to see is as we go into the VPI realm, we're starting to leave out these communities of minority, low-income, traditionally underserved. So going back to what we talked about early, please get together a project-specific plan detailing your public hearing logistics. Address those logistics as if you were having an in-person meeting. You want to ensure the public has an opportunity to view the project documents prior to and during your public hearing. Ensure that they have access to all of the materials, presentation, displays, and any other material that you are providing. You want to remember that the intent is for the public to not only receive information from you, transportation professionals or agencies, but also to submit comments. So you want to ensure the public can submit comments via testimony or whatever they want to do, questions during a comment session or period during your public hearing. To do that, you need to make sure that your comments are documented and that verbal comments submitted as part of the hearing can be recorded and transcribed as needed. Your options could include offering a toll-free number or however you want to do it to receive those comments. But you need to clearly disclose prior to your public hearing the method that you will be using to assess the number of responses that you get from the public meeting and the nature of how those comments will be addressed. How will you address people's comments? Don't just say we're having a virtual public hearing and people have no idea how to leave comments, no idea whether or not they'll be addressed, no idea where they'll see them. You have to be able to take comments in the same way you would as if it was an in-person event. So there was a lot of information in a short amount of time. We wanted to give enough time for questions if we had those. So we do have VPI tool fact sheets that are available, and there will be a link at the end, and it gives you information on each one of the 8 tools, including the 3 that I talked about, but it gives you information on each of the 8 VPI tools that we have, and there's also a link to help you understand where you can go to get more information or to let us know if you would like to have a peer exchange or a discussion. So I do want to thank you once again for being with us today, and now I will turn it over to Kevin McCoy to address some questions, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And yeah, we're going to move right into the Q&A period. We have several questions already queued up to go. So Our first question is, what is the definition of environmental justice community? And how does environmental justice differ from an underserved community?
Okay, that is a very good question. I am trying to get back to my screen. Okay, so when you're talking about environmental justice community, you're talking about specifically to the Executive Order 12898, you're talking about a minority and low income population, period. That is who you're talking about. Minority and low income. Minority is defined by 5 categories. So when you just say minority, don't just say there's a minority community out there. Well, great. Which one of the 5 categories is it? Minority, African American, Asian American, Native American, Island Pacificer, and I think Hispanic. Yes, those are the 5. So that's what you're talking about. And you're talking about low income. When you're talking about an underserved community, again, to the way we look at it at Federal Highway, you're talking about a broader sense of those that are underserved. So you could also be talking about those with limited English proficiency. You could be talking about the elderly. You could be talking about those with disabilities, children, any underserved community that has been typically not heard during the decision-making process. But when you say EJ, you're talking about a specific category of minority and low income. When you're talking about underserved, it just depends on what you're looking for. As I showed, the one underserved for our public involvement could be a stay-at-home mom group, but it just depends on how you're looking at it.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. Okay, our next question. To determine what is equitable, do we need to ask the impacted community their needs and wants? And in the baseball example, maybe they want to be in the seats so they don't have to stand to see the game better or enjoy the social aspect of the game.
Absolutely. And part of that is finding out what you need to, I love that question. Part of that is finding out what the community needs, because I wanted to change that slide to show someone standing in the mud. You really don't know what the community wants or would like until you have a conversation with them. As transportation professionals, we tend to guess what they want. Communities will tell you, well, we have a high crime rate in the area. So we put trees out there because we like trees. We think trees are beautiful. The last thing I need in my community is a bunch of trees when I'm telling you it's dark and crime is high. Give me some street lighting. But to know that, you need to talk to the community. And they may say, yes, I don't want to stand up here outside. I want to go into the stands. Great. But when you talk to me, don't put me in the opposite end of the field. I'm not a baseball person. Don't put me where I can't see the game. Well, great, I'm sitting in the seats, but I can't see the game. The point of that slide is to show you want to make it equal. If you're going to have me really enjoy the benefit of what you're doing, then talk to me to find out, or actually see me to find out what I need. You're not seeing that little short fellow if you're giving him one crate to see over a fence. Is what I want people to see. Which means when I say you don't see him, you haven't talked to that community. You have no idea what they want. You're just giving them something that you're giving everybody else. You don't want to do that. Talk to them and see what they need, and then identify what's equitable for them, because what's equitable for them may not be equitable for someone else. In that sense, it's showing the height.
Thank you, Carolyn. So can you describe an example of what you mean when you say a community profile plan?
Yes, a community profile plan is if you're putting a road next to a community and it will be a 5-lane road, you're rerouting something, and you have no idea how that community gets around. Do they walk? Do they take the cars? Do they commute? We tend to close off communities or cul-de-sac them and leave them right there without an understanding of how they operate. Or we will drop a 5-lane. If I dropped a 3 or 5-lane roadway, not in front of your house, but at the end of your street, it will definitely change how you commute, because you have to figure out how to get across that street. If you have children, you need to figure out, oh my gosh, normally I go to work and my 12-year-old walks the 6-year-old to school. So instead of crossing a 2-lane road, now they have to cross a 5-lane road with twice the amount of traffic and trucks. So you have safety issues. When you're building a community profile, figure out how the community operates and works. That will take up some effort. which we do understand. Figure out if they're walking, if they're riding, do they bus, do they ride bicycles? What are they doing? How do they operate? And some of that is just going out to the community and seeing how it operates when we drive around and see our projects. I can help you from a standpoint of understanding what needs to be done, but I can't help you in what's going on in the community. That is something that we all should understand and how the community operates. So to put a road in right next to the community without understanding, here they come again. That feeds into a lot of the trust issues that communities would have because you don't know how they operate. You're moving a bus stop, or we take the bus. Another example, we ride the local bus to get to work. Well, when you put in a road, you're likely will have to move that bus stop. That's going to be a huge impact to that community because they walk. They don't have cars. So if you tell me they don't have cars and you're moving a bus stop, that is a huge impact to the community. Or if you tell me they don't have cars in their demographics and there's an urgent care facility that's a couple miles down, if you move it a mile down, that's fine with people that have cars. But if they're walking and I'm bleeding, I have to walk an additional mile to get to medical assistance. So all of those things are very important. So you build your community profile to get a general picture to understand what is the profile of the community. So hopefully I addressed that question.
Yes, you did. Thank you, Carolyn. And I'm going to try to move a little faster because we have so many great questions coming in.
Okay.
But the next one I want to pose to you is, what are some performance metrics that are used to measure equity in VPI?
We haven't fully developed all of the metrics, but I will say in terms of virtual public involvement, if you're typically having in-person meetings and your meetings from your virtual outreach are expanded exponentially, that is one of the best ways to tell whether or not your outreach is working. We haven't fully developed metrics yet. That is one of the things that we are actually looking at to provide more information as we continue forth in EDC 6 and we continue with our webinars. So please come back and we will be able to give you a little bit more specifics on that. But one of the biggest things you will see is an uptick or an increase in your participation for your public involvement when you're using VPI as of right now.
Thanks, Carolyn. So you mentioned that it's important to have early outreach as part of public outreach, public involvement. So what time frame do you consider to be early enough?
When you start. Actually, under the new CEQ regs, irregardless of what type of project you're doing, whether it's an EA or an EIS, your public involvement needs to be done earlier. If you're doing an EIS, you really go into your NOI with an alternative. And to look at an alternative, you have to have had public outreach. You cannot get to a preferred alternative unless you've had your public outreach. That's in general within the NEPA process. So when you start to look at a project, when you're starting to develop your purpose and need, or you have your purpose and need, there's nothing wrong with going to the public to talk to them about this is what we're looking to do. That's kind of pulling together, which I won't get into here. There's a Pell course pulling together that planning and environmental linkage, that Pell piece of starting your public involvement, but making sure it's documented well enough in the planning part so that information can be carried forward in the environmental. So the information that's started in planning can be used in the project development phase. And I won't go too far down that because there are courses for that, but that is very good. As early as you can, especially once you've developed your P&N.
So one challenge that you might relate to, given that you can't see the participants today on this webinar, the question being, in the virtual world, you might not be able to see the attendees. So how do you know if you're having a diverse group in attendance?
If you can't see them, that is a good point. When you do, under NEPA, I would say you have to have your public outreach. So that's irregardless. But when you're doing a EJ or underserved targeted outreach, your target is that underserved or EJ population. So that's the target that you're looking at. One of the best ways to do that is, again, to talk to someone in the community, because they will be able to tell you and help you pull together the right people so that you don't have that pocket group of minority or low income or any underserved populations that feel left out. Talk to the community leaders, because they will help you target this particular group of people that you may not normally see, whether it's in person or virtual, but they can pull that group together. For example, if it's me, there's a community of people that I know, and if you're talking to me, I'm just using me as an example, I can make sure that you have the right people at that targeted outreach. They may or may not be at the NEPA-required public outreach, but they will be involved in that targeted outreach. So when you target them, you want to target the community leader that can help you pull in those groups that may be traditionally missing. That's a good question. All of these are great.
Thanks, Carolyn. So how does internet access profile, how does a profile of internet access in the community fit into an outreach plan? And how would that be mitigated if limited?
I'm not understanding that one. Can you say it again? I'm sorry. I'm trying to go as fast as I can.
I think the question is saying that if there's limited internet access in a community, how can you mitigate that issue using VPI?
In that sense, you would probably have to use, and I can't say you can't use your mobile apps, because I think most people still do have mobile apps. One of the things about the mobile applications is that internet will be you can get it on the phone, but I've gone out in rural communities and my phone goes blank. But oftentimes you might have to use like a general area where people congregate to have some type of a meeting. VPI may not be accessible in all situations. And again, we don't want to discount the use of the in-person meetings when you have to do that. But there are ways that you can do outreach as far as getting the information out there that there will be a meeting, whether it's the libraries or the kiosks that we talked about, or even people that can use a landline and call in from a virtual meeting that's televised on their TV and can call in with comments. So there's ways to get around not being able to reach those in a rural community.
Okay, great, thank you. And do you think the in-person meeting is dead, or is it a thing of the past that we need to move beyond, or is it still useful?
Gosh, though, please don't take that from this webinar. I think in-person meetings are still very, very, very important, because there's nothing that can replace talking to a person one-on-one. Even in the Florida DOT example, from my understanding, there's a presentation, you can go to a room and watch it still, and there's people in the room that are there if you need help or you need technical assistance, but the people that are answering the questions may be on the screen, but there's also someone there to help you mitigate how you get through to the people if there's questions that are understanding. I mean, honestly, we all have understood how Zoom and Teams work, because you're sitting, you're talking to a computer all day, and I'd love to be talking to everybody in person. I actually throw pieces of candy when people get answers right when I'm teaching, but I can't do that now. I'll just be throwing a piece of candy at a screen. So I think in person is not dead, but we want to expand your outreach by using virtual technology. So it doesn't replace it. No, I do not think it will replace it. And please don't come away from here thinking that, but VPI helps expand how you do your outreach to those communities that actually will prefer information virtually as opposed to in person. It just became a lot more prevalent with COVID-19.
Thank you, Carolyn. Is it okay to collect public comments continually through a project website, or do you need to limit it just to the virtual public meetings?
I think that will require a lot of manpower if you do that. If you're talking about a public hearing, you should set a time limit. It should be from here to here. This is the time we are going to take comments. It will shut down at this point. I personally think when you're taking comments on a project, they should be able to leave comments on the website at any time. But when you're leaving comments at a non-public hearing event, there is no requirement that it has to be addressed, if that makes sense. We try to address those comments. You want to look at them as you're developing or you're refining the alternatives or your preferred alternative. It's okay to look at them and let people continue to leave comments, but not at a public hearing, because you are required to address every comment that you get at a public hearing. So no, shut it down after a certain point and let the public know you have the opportunity from here to here to leave your comment and we will address it. Anything after that, no. But for I guess at a project website, yes, it's fine to leave it there, because again, it is not that requirement to address everything that comes in, because you may get comments, I just really don't like what you guys are doing. Great, thank you for your comment. you don't even have to address all of those.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. We have time for a few more questions. What techniques might you suggest to try to recreate public trust in government if you're in an area where there's been a history of city, county, NPO, or state negative interactions with the community?
Find someone in the community that the community trusts. That's an awesome question. And let them know early. What we tend to do is as transportation professionals, we tend to think we know what's best for communities, and that's fine. That's the way we typically think. That's the way we are actually taught to think. We know what's best in terms of a transportation system, kind of like that visualization picture and the engineers that created that really weird swing. Go to the community and find out who do they trust. When you're talking to them and building your community profile, that is the person that you want to get on your side, because that is the person that needs to fully understand what you're doing, where you're trying to go, what you're trying to get to, and that will help you do an appropriate public outreach plan. When your public outreach plan is done well and you're not giving pockets of people different information, you're telling one pocket of people, if you have land that may be available, well, we're going to rezone this land into this, that, and the other, but you haven't told that to the underserved community and they hear it by way of communication, you're not helping yourselves with trust. You get someone to help you do that, or just make sure you're disseminating the same information to everybody, preferably at the same time. But as things change and you have your other additional meetings, make sure you're also doing that targeted outreach. Again, don't assume that underserved population is getting the information the same way. Make sure that you're having those targeted meetings to just confirm that they have. It takes a little bit of effort, but it's worth it in the end, because that does build trust. That clear understanding and responsiveness to their needs builds trust. And again, same thing, if I'm telling you that it's dark, don't give me trees, give me lights, because you're hearing me.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think we have time for 2 more questions. When considering health impacts, can you also consider mental health, considering that lack of access to transportation is recognized as a major stressor and considered a social determinant of health?
That takes a lot more than a minute or 30 seconds, which I'm trying to answer these in. That is a wonderful question, though, because people don't realize transportation and actually even the social mental health kind of even happened when Rosa sat down on that bus. When she sat down, she was tired. I am mentally and physically stressed. But as I say that, it is very difficult to assess mental health. The best way I would say to do that is to eliminate the stressor of not being heard. And us and people just talking to us, because I can talk to you all day, but if you're not listening to me, it'll be very obvious in the outcome of what you're doing. When you're trying to bring down people's stress, if you think about it, for those that even have kids or a dog or anything that's supposed to listen to you that doesn't, it stresses you out when they don't. But when they do listen to you and they follow really good advice, then you're like, okay, this is better. But that is one of the health things that we can do for just that mental stability. Plus, it helps increase the trust level, and it helps create that relationship to get a project through that will not only be useful for the other part of the community, but it will also be an equitable solution for the entire community. And that may look different for each project. So I'm just very careful on how I say that. To get more detailed, I'd have to specifically talk to you, because every state where I've done training is very different based on the issues that you are having in your particular state.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. This will be our last question. How can employees at DOTs and NPOs that do not have a diverse group of engineers and planners on staff better educate themselves about the needs of minority and low-income communities prior to engaging in those communities?
Oh, I love that question. Do what you're doing today. Find out about when you see things on outreach to EJ communities, whether it's virtual, non-virtual, federal highway. We are here to help. We have a team, but talk to your division offices, your state division offices, your DOTs, if you're not the DOT, your DOT, and then your state division office, and they will even talk to us. It's myself, Bob Washington, Megan Cogburn, where we try and provide training as well as our resource center on environmental justice just in general. You don't have to have a diverse staff. Of course, that helps, but if you don't have that diverse staff, seek out training on how to do outreach for LEP communities, EJ communities, underserved communities, and what equity really looks like. That is a wonderful question, and thank you for that one.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. And I'm sorry that we didn't have time to address everyone's questions today, but we'll be providing contact information for that follow-up here in just a moment. So I do want to invite everyone to participate in an evaluation poll about this webinar so that we can learn how you thought it went and what we might be able to do better in the future. So you can use that same link as before to do that. And we'll make it another announcement with that link, and this poll will stay open even after the webinar is concluded. But for more information, you can visit the Federal Highway Administration VPI website or join the VPI email list so that you find out about future webinars like this and when we have other materials and opportunities available. You can also sign up for the EDC News and the Innovator bi-monthly newsletter. You can also text FHWA Innovation to 468-311 to sign up for those. And then here we have those contacts for the VPI initiative that I promised. We have Carolyn's contact, as well as her co-leads for this initiative, Jill Stark and Lana Lau. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Carolyn for being our presenter. And that's going to conclude our webinar for today. So thanks everyone and have a great rest of your afternoon.